It's just a tip, I promise. Hello everyone, I'm Taylor Bambico. I'm a self-published author, both young adult and adult, and today I'm going to be discussing the 3 things you need to take into consider before you use any type of weapon in your book. More specifically, what you need to consider before you use firearms in your books. Considering I use lots of Because I use a lot of firearms throughout my books, I figured why not make a short video on the 3 things I take into account before I put one in a story. That being said, let's get started. First and foremost, take into account the era of your story. For instance, let's say you have a story that takes place in the 1930s. I highly doubt any of your characters are going to use anything like a Glock, for instance. Now, before I go any further, I will do a quick safety check to verify this firearm is unloaded. Magazine out. Nothing in the chamber. We're good to go. Now, let's say you have a story that takes place in the 1990s, for instance. Yes, it's very probable your character will be using a Glock pistol like this. Well, I highly doubt they're going to have one that's Cerakoted to resemble the Nintendo Zapper. This gun is very fun to shoot, though. Now, let's say your story is in the 1930s. There's a good chance your character might have a 1911. Real quick, I'll clear this firearm as well. We're good. Again, it won't be one like this. It more than likely would be a blued or a Parkerized version of it. I think it was about the 1970s when two-tone guns started coming around. Usually they were a nickel frame and a blued slide. Again, there was no Cerakote in the 1930s. Now, let's say, for instance, you're writing a Western. More than likely, your character is going to use revolvers. It won't necessarily be one like this, though. Again, let's do a quick safety check. We're good. Now, there were some double-action revolvers in the late 1800s, but for the most part, they were single-action. So here's a quick overview on double-action versus single-action. If you've ever seen any Clint Eastwood spaghetti western movie, that's a single-action. But basically, this is what you have to do. Whereas double-action, for instance, you just do this. One thing I don't recommend your characters doing, even though it looks cool, is fanning the revolver. Yes, like that. It looks cool, but from what I understand, it's relatively hard on the action. It's just as bad as if you were to actually spin the cylinder on this and slam it shut. I don't recommend it. If you want your character to do it, fine. It's just going to make them look more like an amateur as far as I'm concerned. On to my second point, take into account your character's past experience. Were they in the military? Were they law enforcement? Are they an enthusiast? Or do they have no clue on how to handle any firearm whatsoever? Let's say your character absolutely knows nothing about firearms. Good chance they might do something like this.
Your vitamins A's and B's and... It's an accident! It's an accident! The trigger, it's sensitive!
Okay, yeah. Now let's say your character has a vast amount of history with firearms. For instance, if your character is skilled on the 1911 platform, they're going to carry it in what is known as Condition 1. All that means is the hammer is back and the safety is on with a round chamber, so it's ready to go when they need it. Don't be like the biker in the beginning of Terminator 2. See how he wasn't prepared there? Though I doubt a 1911 is going to stop one of them. And the third thing to take into account is this firearm practical? Case in point, in Silent Rage, Parabellum, and Traffic, all my characters use a firearm like this. Again, let's do a quick safety check to verify this firearm is unloaded. No magazine. Bolt locked. Nothing in. Good to go. Now, the AR pattern rifle, as far as I'm concerned, is very practical for any novel taking place from about 1959 to present. It's a lightweight semi-automatic rifle with very little recoil and has a magazine capacity of generally 30 rounds. A great equalizer as far as I'm concerned. Now, here's something else to take into account before you use any firearm in your books as well. If your character is using one of these, make sure they know how the safety works. If it has an external one, of course. I mean, on the AR platform, it's right here. It's easy to reach. Just don't forget to turn it on or off. I'm sure one of you is knowing I left this in the fire position.
Safety should be on at all times.
Well, that's my safety, sir.
That's very true, actually. In fact, I have that morale patch as well. And one last thing to take into account is, I highly doubt any firearm your characters are using that is handheld is going to knock another character off their feet. If there's enough energy to drive your character's opponent off their feet, there's enough energy to drive your character off their feet as well. I mean, for instance, here is the 5.56 NATO cartridge that the AR-15 uses, and some people actually leave this whole thing as what's going down the barrel. It's just a tip, I promise. I have that morale patch too. But yes, just the projectile is what's going down the barrel of any firearm. So a quick overview of the 3 things you need to take into account before you use a firearm in your books. 1, the era your book takes place in. 2, your character's past experience. And 3, is it practical? I know there was those other two I added at the end. Those are just a bonus for you. I'm not going to include them on the list. Anyway, if you're a writer and you're looking for tips on how to use firearms in your books, hopefully you found this video helpful. And as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider subscribing if you want to see more content. Leave your comments in the section below. I do enjoy reading them, and have a great day. See ya!